The late afternoon sun was sliding down over the wide New Mexico desert. The land stretched so far you could almost believe it went on forever. The big, tall rocks, called mesas, were glowing in the light. The sun made them shine like giant castles covered in gold. Above them, the sky looked like a painting. The colors swirled, purple mixed with orange, and copper streaked across like brushstrokes on a canvas. At Steven Seagal's ranch, the day was slowly ending. The horses were already settling in, pushing their noses into hay bales and munching happily. The smell of cedar wood mixed with the dry, dusty desert air. The wooden porch groaned softly under Steven's heavy boots as he stood there, a mug of tea cooling in his hand. He looked out across the land, quiet and calm. This was why he had moved here. For peace. A peace that didn't need words. A peace that could only be understood if you just stood still and listened. But then he heard it. The trucks. The sound rolled across the desert like thunder, but thunder with bad manners. Engines roared, mufflers rattled like angry drums, and tires crunched the gravel road. Dust rose behind them as two beat-up old pickup trucks crossed the cattle guard. The way they drove in, crooked, messy, and loud, told Steven they hadn't come here to be friendly. The trucks parked hard, like they wanted to own the place. The doors creaked open, and men climbed out. Trouble had arrived. These men looked rough, as if the county itself had shaped them out of stone and bad years. Their jeans were faded to gray. Their boots were scarred from kicking gravel and worse. Their shirts were patched in places, but still dirty. Their faces were shadowed with stubble, and their eyes were sharp, narrowed from too much whiskey and too many grudges. One man let a heavy chain hang from his shoulder. Another carried a long piece of rebar, gripping it like a friend he trusted more than people. From the first truck, the biggest man stepped out. His name was Jeb Rollins. He was thick-set, with shoulders that looked like sacks of cement and a jaw made for clenching tight. He moved slowly, his eyes scanning the porch like a coyote looking for a weak spot in the henhouse. "Well now," drawled a skinny man with a snake tattoo that curled up his throat. His voice was sly, like he enjoyed being mean. "Ain't every day Hollywood comes to our valley." Steven didn't move. He didn't blink. Just standing there, his presence filled the porch. "Evening," he said calmly. "You boys lost." The tattooed man laughed, but it was a brittle, ugly sound. "Not lost. Found. Word is you've been pumping water like you own the sky. That bore well of yours, folks say it's lowering the table." Steven's voice stayed even. "You got proof? Or just gossip and boots?" The men chuckled, amused that he wasn't scared. Jeb Rollins's smirk grew wider. "This ain't about proof. This is about respect. You live here. You pay rent." Steven set his mug down on the porch railing with a quiet tap. "I've got deeds and fences," he said. "That makes you trespassers." The man with the chain, scar-nosed and broad-handed, let it clatter against the truck bed. The loud metal sound made the horses flick their ears nervously. "That's funny," he growled. "We think of ourselves as landlords. $3,000 tonight, $3,000 every month. Pay it, and your fences don't burn." Steven's eyes narrowed just a little, enough for them to notice. "You think this is how you hold ground? With threats?" Snake Tattoo stepped onto the first porch stair, grinning wide and ugly. "With more than threats, old man. With lessons." Jeb Rollins joined them on the porch. He smelled of gasoline and cheap beer. His shadow fell long across the wood, blocking the last rays of sunset. "I heard you got your hands," Jeb said, staring straight into Steven's eyes. "Heard you used to be somebody's problem. But this ain't a dojo. Out here, we bury problems." The tension snapped like a stretched fence wire. Scar-No swung his chain. Rebar Man lunged forward. Snake Tattoo reached for Steven's shoulder. The porch erupted. In one smooth motion, Steven caught Snake Tattoo's wrist, twisted it in a circle, and let the man's own movement slam him into the boards. The wood cracked, and the man gasped for breath. The chain whistled through the air, but Steven stepped into its swing, slid his elbow under Scar-Nose's arm, and rolled him sideways. The chain wrapped around the man's own arm like a trap. Scar crashed down, his own weapon now holding him. Rebar came down hard, expecting to hit Steven, but Steven slid his forearm against the bar, rolled it offline, and twisted the man's grip until his fingers screamed. The rebar dropped into the dirt, and the man followed, groaning. Then it was quiet. Steven stood steady and calm. 3 men groaned at his feet. His voice carried, low and dangerous, like thunder about to break. "This is your warning. Trespass on my land again, and the ground itself will remember you." Jeb Rollins hadn't moved the whole time. His smirk was smaller now, his jaw twitching tight. "So you've got tricks. But this valley doesn't care about tricks. Tomorrow, you'll find out whose sky you're living under." The men limped back to their trucks. Snake Tattoo rubbed his sore wrist. Scar Nose struggled to coil his chain. Rebar held his arm, limping in pain. Engines roared, dust rose, and the trucks pulled away. Jeb Rollins leaned out his window, his eyes cold and sharp. "Pretty fences you got, but fences are just lines on wood. Valleys don't take sides. Men do, and you just picked wrong." The trucks disappeared into the dusk. The horses lowered their heads and went back to eating. Steven lifted his mug, now cold, and sipped. The tea tasted like iron. He knew the night would not be quiet. They would come back. Next time, they'd bring more than threats. The desert night carried its own weight. The wind slid over the mesas like a slow hand, whispering through cottonwoods, pushing dry leaves across the yard. Steven sat in the barn doorway, a lantern glowing behind him. The smell of leather, hay, and horses filled the air, steadying him. The animals stirred, their nostrils flaring. They sensed it before he did. Trouble was coming back. Down on the county road, the truck engines cut out. Silence spread across the land. Then came the crunch of boots on gravel. Rough voices whispered in the dark, the whispers of men who only felt brave in shadows. The south gate groaned. A metallic twang rang out as wire snapped. A chain hit the dirt, and the fence sagged open. Flashlight beams danced across the yard. They jumped over fence posts, the water trough, the stacked hay. Steven placed a calming hand on his horse's neck. "Easy," he whispered. "We'll keep the noise outside." Through the broken fence came 6 men. Snake Tattoo led, his ink gleaming pale in the light. Scar Nose dragged the heavy chain behind him, like a pet he couldn't leave. Rebar held his bar in his left hand, still cradling his injured wrist. Alongside them moved 3 brothers, thick-necked, mean-eyed, like dogs cut from the same poor cloth. And then came Jeb Rollins. He didn't carry a flashlight. He didn't need one. He strolled slowly, coyote-like, letting his boys scurry with their beams, while his eyes drank in the ranch. Steven let them wander for a moment. Then he stepped into the yard light. "Evening, boys," he said. His voice was steady, clear. The flashlights jerked toward him all at once. The men froze. Their shadows stretched long and twisted on the dirt. Jeb Rollins smiled. "We came back polite. No guns. Just neighbors collecting a debt." "You came stupid," Steven answered. His eyes locked on Scar Nose. "You don't need chains to talk." Scar snarled and swung the chain. The heavy iron whistled through the air. Steven stepped into the swing, elbow under Scar's arm, and rolled him sideways. The chain wrapped around Scar's own bicep. A second later, Scar was on the ground, groaning, his own weapon biting into him. Rebar roared and charged. Steven slid inside the attack, pressed his forearm against the bar, and twisted the grip until it slipped loose. Rebar fell to the dirt, groaning again. One brother rushed low, head first. Steven placed a palm on the back of his head and guided him straight into the ground. Another brother grabbed Steven's collar, but Steven rolled his wrist and redirected him, spinning him hard into the dirt. The third brother froze, too late to act. Snake Tattoo pulled a knife, trying to strike Steven's side. Steven grabbed his thumb and pinky, bent them just enough to send lightning pain up his arm. The knife clattered to the ground. Steven nudged it away with his boot, sliding it under the porch where it could rust in peace. Through it all, Steven never shouted. He never hit. His movements were quiet, sharp, and sure. He redirected every ounce of violence they threw at him, until the ground itself seemed to gather them up. One by one, the men groaned in the dirt, and Steven stood steady, calm, like the desert itself, endless, patient, unbroken. The only man still standing was Jeb Rollins. He hadn't moved. His smile had grown thin, almost gone, but it was still there on his face like a stubborn shadow. "You're good," Jeb said finally, his voice low and sharp. "I'll give you that." "I'm patient," Steven answered, calm and steady. His eyes didn't move away. "Good is for horses." Jeb tilted his head to the side. His jaw tightened. He muttered under his breath, "Boys, show him what chores look like when you break the plow." The other men began to shift, ready to step forward, but before they could move, something broke the night. Bright headlights swept across the cottonwood trees like a silver hand brushing leaves. A sheriff's car turned onto the dusty county road, its big engine humming steady. Red and blue lights bounced and danced across the yard, making the shadows jump. Jeb's jaw twitched. He whistled sharply, 2 short notes. At once his men scrambled up, dragging each other toward the broken fence. The man with the snake tattoo hissed like his inked skin come alive. "We got numbers, Rollins," he spat. "Not tonight," Jeb snapped back, his voice quick and angry. The gang pulled away, muttering promises of revenge. Scarnose half dragged his heavy chain. Rebar clutched his sore wrist, still hurting from the fight. Snake held onto his pride instead of reaching for his knife. One by one, they spilled out of the broken fence just as the sheriff's cruiser rolled into the yard. Out climbed Sheriff Amos, his hat brim low over his eyes. His face was calm, but his eyes already read the story written on the ground. The bent wire, the boot prints in the dirt, the smashed posts. "Evening, Steven," the sheriff said, his voice steady as always. "You let me finish my pie. I appreciate that." Steven straightened and dusted off his hands. "Wouldn't want to ruin a good night," he said simply. "You handle it." Amos asked. "I tried to teach," Steven said, looking at the sagging fence line. "They weren't ready." Amos let out a long sigh. "Jeb Rollins never was. You want me to chase him down tonight?" "Tomorrow's fine," Steven answered. "You'll find him bragging somewhere." The sheriff's eyes moved to the broken posts and sagging wire. "You want a county crew to fix that fence?" "No," Steven said firmly. "I want the men who cut it to swing the hammers." Amos studied him for a long moment. Then he nodded once. "You'll get the chance. I'll see to it." The cruiser idled in the quiet night. Slowly the sounds faded until the desert was still again. The chain lay in the dust where Steven had dropped it, silent, waiting for morning. Steven walked along the fence line with his flashlight, checking every cut and twist in the wire. The beam glinted on the sharp edges. He knew the men would return, but not as prowlers this time. They would return as workers. The whole valley would see them put the posts back straight. That was the lesson. Back at the barn, the horses had calmed. Their warm sides rose and fell with slow breaths. Steven laid a hand on one's hide and listened to the rhythm. "Easy," he whispered again. The night passed without more trouble, but morning would bring its own reckoning. The desert dawn rose sharp and bright, painting the sky with red and gold. Every shadow on the ground looked honest, and every sound carried far. The cottonwoods swayed gently in the early breeze. Steven Seagal stood by the south fence line, a tin cup of hot coffee in his hand, waiting. Right on time, a trail of dust rose from the county road. A sand-colored pickup rattled toward the ranch, with the sheriff's Bronco trailing behind like a watchful chaperone. The bed of the pickup was stacked with cedar posts, wire spools, and a heavy post driver that looked mean enough to hurt the pride of whoever had to swing it. The trucks pulled in. Out climbed Jeb Rollins, his shoulders stiff, jaw tight, eyes cold. Behind him shuffled Snake Tattoo, Scarnose with his thumb wrapped from the night before, and the 3 brothers, their boots dragging like schoolboys walking to detention. Sheriff Amos leaned against his Bronco, sipping coffee, his calm eyes never leaving the men. Steven pointed at the sagging line of wire and broken posts. "You broke it," he said evenly. "Now you fix it." No one argued. The men went to work. The thunk of the post driver echoed across the ranch as it pounded cedar deep into the earth. Sweat ran down their necks. Their pride slipped away faster than the sweat. Steven did not shout. He did not curse. He guided me. He showed the youngest brother how to use his hip against the pull of the wire, so the fence would stay tight. He corrected Scar's sloppy angle with a simple touch to the shoulder. He made Snake tattoo staple wire on the proper side of the knot, firm but fair. The work stretched on under the hot sun, steady and relentless. Post by post, the fence began to stand tall again. Every cedar stake was a reminder. Breaking is easy, but building back takes sweat and strength. By mid-morning, the line gleamed straight and strong. Steven walked along it, running his palm over the smooth wood. He plucked the wire once. It sang clear, like a string. He nodded. Good. The men slumped, exhausted, waiting to be sent away. But Steven wasn't done. He brought out a broom and 2 buckets. You spilled pride all over my yard last night, he said. Cigarette butts, chain scuffs, footprints where they don't belong. Clean it. Snake muttered under his breath, but one sharp look from Sheriff Amos shut him up. They swept, scraped, and worked until the yard looked new again. Scar coiled the ugly chain and hung it neatly in Steven's barn. Tools, not toys, Steven said. Finally, Steven turned to face Jeb Rollins. Anything else you owe? Jeb's jaw worked. He swallowed hard. Words sat like glass in his throat. His men watched. The sheriff waited. Jeb cleared his throat. Tell your wife. He struggled, his pride fighting him. At last, he forced it out. Tell her I'm sorry. The air went still. Snake and Scar blinked, shocked to hear their leader bend. Steven studied him for a long time, then nodded slowly. I'll tell her. The sheriff tossed his empty coffee cup into his truck. Looks like the valley bought itself a morning, he said. Jeb and his men climbed into the pickup. This time there was no swagger, no smirks. The dust rose as they left, but it didn't roar. Steven and Sheriff Amos stood by the mended fence. The horses grazed nearby, as if the land itself had sighed in relief. You want me to put this in a report? Amos asked. Write it however you like, Steven said, but make sure it says they learned. The sheriff tipped his hat. That's more than I get most nights. When the trucks disappeared down the road, Steven walked back to the porch. Marin was waiting there with 2 mugs of hot tea. She touched her throat gently. The faint red mark almost healed. I heard the fence sing, she said softly. Sounded like a hymn. Steven handed her the mug, his eyes soft. It's a practical song. Cedar, wire, sweat, and lessons. You didn't just beat them, she whispered. You made them learn. Steven looked out at the straight fence line glowing in the sun. Beating men's easy. Teaching them, that's the fight worth having. The horses lifted their heads, ears pricked as if they agreed, and in the quiet that followed, the valley itself seemed to settle. Fences mended, pride reshaped,